Okay. Hey, just want to thank everybody for being here with this great panel. And I see Councilman Withers and Council Lady Hurt here. It's fantastic. I have a couple of remarks, if this is okay, to get before we get to the experts. Um, the draft of the East Bank vision that they was the largest community engagement since Nashville Next. But and that makes it one of the largest in our city's history. And the goal of the community engagement and of the plan is to create a vibrant, thriving neighborhood where, frankly, hundreds of acres of asphalt sits today. And so for the first time in modern history of Nashville, we have the opportunity to plan a core part of our city from the ground up and in a way that prioritizes the values that we have as a community. So I just want to thank this group of experts to talk about those values and how they can be implemented through the East Bank plan. Now that's sidewalks and bike lanes and multimodal transportation, affordable housing, cultural space. All of this needs to be part of the plan, and I'm grateful that the Planning Commission passed unanimously last Thursday the vision for the East Bank future. But we're here today to talk about another core value that lives in every element of the East Bank plan, and that's a commitment to sustainability and resiliency. But what does that look like? Well, thank you all for coming to discuss and to flag for the community what is our opportunity for sustainability and resilience in a modern smart growth plan. Now, I think there are a few ways that I believe the East Bank can be one of our most livable communities for generations. And that's a focus on waste minimization during construction and operations. We believe the East Bank could be Nashville's first zero waste neighborhood. We can increase connectivity and mobility and explore street designations as zero emission or pedestrian only. We can implement sustainable building requirements and codes so we can target zero emissions through renewable energy installations, procurement, and offsets. And then require an annual measuring and disclosure of energy performance by all buildings. And also to create new parks and green space with an aim to provide 100% access to green space within a 5-minute walk of the East Bank. Now, I am so excited for these panelists to also talk about stormwater management and flood mitigation. Those of us who've been in Nashville for a while would recognize this is a constant challenge from our dear friend, the Cumberland River, right here. Now, most neighborhoods manage stormwater parcel by parcel, but on the East Bank, we have the opportunity to implement a district-wide stormwater plan to minimize flooding. And we can also leverage our proximity to the Cumberland for potential nature-based solutions to flooding and stormwater management if we do it in advance and as a plan. Now, we know the devastation that floods can cause to neighborhoods. But here's an opportunity to use strategic planning to get ahead of the potential natural disasters that do cause damage and heartache for our community. And in an era of global warming, we have to anticipate that there will be more and not less in the future. But let me hand it over to this great panel. The East Bank, I hope, will set a standard for greenways and bikeways integrated into development that will connect Shelby Park to Germantown and open new paths for commuters on both sides of the Cumberland River, and also the river itself, to be used as a true waterfront that residents can really enjoy. So I just want to thank our great panelists for meeting us today here and discussing their knowledge and bringing their expertise into the discussion. Harriet Brooks, the landscape architect with Metro Planning and Design. Mikhail Houghton at the Cumberland River Compact, who for so many years has been the steward of our river and its relationship with Nashville. Scott Potter, Metro Water Services. You say the word stormwater, Scott Potter will appear. and Erica Weeks, Associate Principal and Director of Sustainability for Hastings Architecture. And then, of course, my gratitude to Kendra Abelquitz, my office's Sustainability and Resilience Officer. I mean, Kendra brings remarkable expertise, I should say Dr. Abkowitz, expertise and counsel that we rely on every day. And with her help and with your help to bring a new level of sustainability and resilience into development happening in Nashville. And for that, I am grateful. And let me turn this over to Kendra and give Scott back his microphone. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Cooper, for your inspiring words about how the East Bank presents real opportunity for us to transform our city, and in a way that makes us responsible stewards for our community and to leave a positive impact on generations to come. Good morning to each of you. It's great to see many familiar faces in the crowd. Hopefully you're enjoying this beautiful weather that we have here in Cumberland Park. And let's get started with our conversation on sustainability and resilience as part of redevelopment of the East Bank. Again, thanks to our panelists. These are 4 incredible experts who I've really enjoyed working with. And let's hear about topics germane to sustainability and resilience from them. So Mayor Cooper already introduced our panelists, so we'll get started with a facilitated discussion. So, first question. The mayor and Metro Planning have engaged in 20 plus months of careful thought and engagement with many stakeholders to develop the Imagine East Bank Vision document, which was approved by Metro Planning Commission last Thursday, as Mayor Cooper mentioned. Harriet, our representative from the Planning Department, help us remember what a vision document is, what it isn't, and how it is intended to inform development.
Sure. Thank you, Kendra. So just laying the foundation, a vision document is a policy tool. And in planning speak, that means that it is a compilation of these past 20 months or so of community engagement, but also technical research and analysis, site analysis, consultation with our consultant teams, and different steering committees. And the vision document is kind of a report on that. So in that way, it's a moment in time, saying this is kind of where we are today, but also here is an outline of things we would like to see for the future. So it's very visionary. It lays the groundwork for future rezonings or other policy tools that the planning department may use in the future. It is not a financing mechanism, a funding mechanism, operations document. It is not design or engineering tools. Those all come within the implementation phase. And it is not a rezoning in and of itself. So no property within the 338 acres of the East Bank are being rezoned as a part of the vision document process. It is really just something that is laying the groundwork for this is what we heard from the community, this is what we found in our research and analysis, and this is where we think we want to move in the future for the East Bank.
Great, thanks, Harriet. So let's address another elephant in the room or in the community. So the Imagine East Bank vision sets forth concepts that will create multiple neighborhoods and involve significant investment in an area that suffered tremendously in the 2010 flood. So I know many of us lived in Nashville at that time and remember that devastation. What will it take from a mitigation and resiliency perspective to protect this investment and the thousands of citizens who would live, work, and play in this area? So I think, Scott, we'll let you kick this one off.
Thank you, Kendra. Immediately what leaps to mind is May 2010. And what are we going to do to avoid any kind of damage associated with an event of that magnitude? I think what we saw in Florida recently indicates that we have to expect what we've seen in the past, but we also have to plan for what we anticipate to be a worse event in the future. What I've been very heartened to observe amongst the developers that are working along the East Bank is, number one, the recognition of the risk. Because we have two things here. We have opportunity and we have risk management. Well, I'm combining both of them in my discussions with all of the developers and all the experts at Metro Water Services. I do want to call Professor Doug Galbraith out in the audience. He's the chair of the Stormwater Management Committee, and he is a key component of the risk discussion along the East Bank development. So if you look at what's required first, to build a commercial building in Davidson County, according to our Stormwater Management Manual, you're required to put your finished floor at 1 foot above the 100-year FEMA flood map. Okay, that's the minimum. Well, no one associated with these developments has talked about doing the bare minimum. People are recognizing that we have to do something a little bit more. So for me, my point to begin is May 2010. And at that point, you say, well, you add a factor of safety to May 2010. And the key discussion point going forward will be what is an appropriate factor of safety. So we have Roger Lindsay, Tom Palco, who is certified floodplain managers at Metro Water Services, who are the two experts on how the Cumberland River behaves in Davidson County. They are fully involved in all of the discussions. The Corps of Engineers has been a spectacular partner with us ever since May 2010 on modeling the Cumberland River on a variety of different storm events to predict what will happen. The models that we have now are much better than we had in May 2010. I'm very comfortable with our ability to predict what will happen under each kind of a rain event. So you take all of that information and you go into the conversation recognizing that you have to do a little bit more than what is required to make it as safe as we can. Now, there's going to be a level of judgment that we're going to have to implement, and that's going to be engineering judgment, which is involved in any kind of anything you build. There will be judgment calls. But I'm going to be pushing the envelope on making sure that we go as far as we need to mitigate the risk to the degree we can.
And I'll invite our other panelists to add on if necessary. So, also, you may have noticed when you came in, we do have note cards available, and so our Fin team is walking around with those. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask after we get through our initial questions, please reach out to one of them, and they'll bring them up, and we'll get them addressed. So Harriet also, again, just told us about what this visioning document is intended to do, not intended to do. As we think about transitioning to additional stages of planning and implementation and actually development of the East Bank, what do you all think are really core strategies and specific mechanisms that we need to incorporate into the East Bank to make it a truly sustainable and resilient community? So I'll let Erica and Mikhail speak to this first.
Great, thank you. I think something in the science of sustainability, the science of resiliency that we need to keep in mind throughout this entire process is the theory of nested system development and nested system thinking. Because everything that's coming in to these different parcels, into these different areas of land, we also have to think about what is coming out. So think about that from even a food production / food waste standpoint. And we have a great opportunity here with energy and water to fully understand a systems theory of how to create a sustainable environment, knowing what those flows are. And when we also think about those as flows, how often do you get to, in different parts of the community, make that visible, have that transparent to the community so that people understand how these things that they might do in their daily life affect everyone else around them? So if you think about where these things come from and how flows occur, we can stretch that into energy and food and our waste streams and create these higher, loftier goals for these different districtings. When we think about things as a district, just as mentioned before, and we're not trying to solve for something parcel by parcel, we have greater opportunity to also have value for the community in a way that a developer on their own wouldn't have to solve the problem just in their parcel lines. So I think in our theories of having a district that is fully sustainable, we have to keep that 30,000-foot view so that we're fully understanding what those incoming and outgoing are.
Thanks. I think I'll touch on the resilience part since Erica hit sustainability. And I think if we're building a resilient community, we want to build in a lot of redundancies. Scott Potter taught me that a long time ago. So, you know, if you think about each system, whether it's transportation or stormwater, energy, what are the redundancies that we've built in case of, you know, flood, drought, heat? I think those are the major sort of threats that we're looking at in the future. And I want to call out a part of this plan that isn't specifically environmental, but I think is key to building in that redundancy. And you know, we've seen extreme heat in other communities, and the idea of neighborhood community cooling centers and neighbors looking out for each other. If your air conditioning goes out, if your power goes out, is your neighbor looking out for you? And I think one of the things that the planning department has really envisioned in a beautiful way is a neighborhood for Nashville families. And so if we can construct that kind of community here on the East Bank, then it's a built-in redundancy. When these events inevitably happen, we've got a redundancy that will keep our citizens safe.
Great, and I appreciate the flag to think about heat, Mikhail. One exciting thing we'll be rolling out soon is some updated heat mapping data that was collected by citizen scientists across Nashville in August. And so I think there's a great opportunity to put that data to work, and thanks, Mikhail, for your team's partnership on that particular effort. So let's also talk about some cost-related factors. So we've been speaking about sustainability and resilience and how important that is going to be to East Bank redevelopment and also our community. Oftentimes there is a perception that it costs more to build green, to build sustainable, and to build resilience. You know, from this panel's perspective, A, is that true? And then also, is it a worthwhile investment?
So I think there is an overarching perception that green building does cost more. And I think that's come from probably 20 or so years of history where things have, you know, emerged maybe late in the game on a project, or something that has happened on a project to create more efficiency that was maybe unintended from the start. But I think if everyone takes a holistic view of their development projects and how they're looking at what those intended outcomes would be for the project, the earlier you define and you bake in different strategies that are related to energy, that are related to water, that are capitalizing on potential district-wide solutions, the more you're going to see that the cost is neutralized because you're doing the right thing for the long-term benefit of a 50 to 100-year project. When we don't look at that and we sort of jump right in and we start designing what the building looks like, maybe figuring out how many units are in it, and we aren't really holistically thinking about what the project outcomes would be, I think that does make that more challenging and more sensitive towards costs, especially when things have to be added after the fact or afterward. So really coming into how things could capitalize at the front end and setting those strategies to be smart before we really dive in and start designing any of the projects.
So we have one final prepped question, and so if you have your questions on your note cards, please start handing those to the ends of the aisle so we can make sure we are responsive to your ideas and feedback. The mayor, as he noted earlier, has stated that the East Bank plan will really benefit all of Nashville. And so from your perspective as an expert on sustainability and resilience, how could this project benefit the larger community from an environmental sustainability and resilience perspective? So Scott, I'll let you kick that one off.
I'm going to start by reminding everybody that I love our river. It's a wonderful water source. Its health is continuously improving. And when I say that, I'm not offering opinion, I'm offering a factual statement. So any kind of engagement with the river is going to be good for this city. And to quantify that for a citizen who lives in Donaldson may not be as easy as it looks, but if we can build an environment where someone is engaged more with the entire county than not only with their own neighborhood, I think that provides a benefit that transcends any kind of economic measure. It's a social benefit, it's a health benefit, and it's a wellness benefit. So when I see the visions and the drawings of what is being proposed for the East Bank, I just see that as an overall good. And quantification of good is really hard, but what we have now versus what we have the opportunity to build is just an improvement for their entire region. Not just downtown, not just the county, but for the region. This is a beautiful opportunity to embrace our beautiful river.
I'll add that the new development in this area will be brought up to current and exceed current stormwater standards. So the water flowing off this land will be cleaner. So that means the water flowing down to, Harpeth Valley Utility District, which many people in the western part of Davidson County and Brentwood, that's where they get their water. So that water will be cleaner. The water that Nashville gives to Ashland City or Clarksville will be cleaner because of the redevelopment of this area and the bringing it up to current stormwater standards. I think that the people and property will be safer as a result of the increased stormwater and flood requirements. And then, one thing that we don't really talk about is how important this corridor is to the biodiversity of our region. We live in an extremely biodiverse region. We used to say the third most biodiverse region in the world. We might be falling to fourth, I'm not sure, but it's a very biodiverse region. And this river is the corridor for migrating birds coming up from Latin America to make it to the Appalachian Mountains and go west. So this river is very important, and the more that we can follow through on these nature-based solutions that incorporate the plants and the wildlife necessary to help these birds, the more that we can sustain and preserve the biodiversity that we all inherited. So that's how I think it benefits the community as a whole.
Just one final thought on that. As a community grows and we look at this as a long-range vision, right? This is decades of work that workforce will be able to learn from, be able to implement, design, construction, and operationally. So how do we make that effort, to have the community effort to do the right thing and understand what those things are, because it is such a long-range vision and will have so much impact to people who are actually working on projects every day.
I think that. Sorry, I'm struggling with my mic a little bit. I love all of those answers. Scott stole mine a little bit, and throughout the past 20 months, I've been most excited about the opportunity to kind of bring the city back to the river and reorient the city back to the river, both in terms of a placemaking opportunity, but also really in terms of resiliency. I think there's a great opportunity here with the plan to let people see the work that we're doing in terms of climate mitigation and climate adaptation, and make that a part of people's everyday lives when we're creating outdoor spaces and parks that have resilient landscapes, that are working towards habitat restoration, that are floodable places when we're getting our rainy springs. That enables people to see kind of climate change and see the ways that we are interacting and trying to create more innovative places and more protective places for our community. So I'm super excited about that opportunity. I also really see this project as kind of a game changer for Metro. There's some really innovative ideas here that we can build upon that could really make Nashville a kind of leader, especially in the southeast, in terms of resilient riverfront projects. So I think that's really exciting. And I think it's also, it's kind of a once in a generation opportunity where you have land of this size in downtown, where you don't have to do a lot of demolition, where there's not already a lot of kind of embodied work to be done before you get to the fun stuff, which is the designing what you want the place to be. And so there's a huge opportunity with this project to build some really great neighborhoods that are real communities for Nashvillians that I think is super excited. And then just have resiliency and sustainability integrated into that in ways that are much harder if you're trying to build in neighborhoods that already exist.
Great. I love that we touched on education, both kind of in a very hyper-local sense, but also regionally and for the county as a whole. Economic development, the concept of piloting innovative technologies and sort of seeing what works, what doesn't work. So thank you for those excellent answers. I think we're ready for questions. Thank you, Amanda. Okay. All right, so our first question, how are you working with housing staff to ensure what's built is sustainable and affordable?
Sorry. I can start with that one. So we have worked throughout the planning process with both MDHA as one of our technical advisors, and we also, throughout the visioning process, had several of the affordable housing community groups, NOAA, Stand Up. Several of them were on our neighborhood committees and steering committees. We've also, in the past 6 weeks since the plan came out, we engaged with the Mayor's Affordable Housing Task Force to develop some housing benchmarks that have been added to the plan since the first draft was released to the public. But we really wanted that to be a kind of community engagement effort and to hear what people wanted to see in terms of affordable housing. And so that is something where benchmarks have been added to the plan and as part of that community engagement effort. And then we also have several priority action items in the plan that will be kind of next steps in terms of implementation moving forward, in terms of making sure that affordable housing is implemented on the East Bank is a very real commitment and large priority as part of this plan.
Am I working now? There we go. Okay. I'll also quickly note that I think there's a very robust dialogue right now with the development community about sustainable building and how that can be, again, part of business as usual. I'm looking at Erica because that's kind of the sweet spot where she works and works with that community to help make that part of their process and help them navigate the various building practices that are out there. And to the extent that any affordable housing that may be part of East Bank redevelopment is funded in part by any federal funds, I think there's significant opportunity for us to look at the whole of government approach that the federal government is executing as it relates to sustainability and resilience. So HUD has taken a leadership role in terms of looking at sustainable building design and how that can be part of the dollars that they push out.
So I think there's a common misconception, again, going back to the cost of green building. But if we're talking about making a resilient community and we're talking about affordable housing, we're talking also about designing buildings correctly so that when you are in an extreme heat event, you are not running your air conditioner as much as a market property, or you are able to stay in your unit and be comfortable so that you can care about your neighbors. So I think if we, again, start to think about that as a more of a how are we treating the community and how are we treating the neighbors, let's push the envelope on the design to make sure we're going above what minimum code says so that we can increase the viability of energy efficiency as well as people staying in place during those extreme events.
Kendra, I'm often struck by when folks say there's a cost to green building. I think there's a larger cost to not green build.
Great. All right, next question. What are the next steps and timeline for approval? So I'll let Harriet take that one.
So the East Bank plan was approved unanimously at Planning Commission last Thursday. Woohoo! That was a really exciting step for us. And so we are now moving into the implementation phase, and there are many kind of dynamics at play with that and next steps. So the planning department, now that we've gotten the plan and the planning process done, we are going to be taking more of a back seat a little bit, but we are still working on the implementation phase. There will be a lot more collaboration and coordination with other metro departments like Scott's in terms of development of the district stormwater plan. There are several, we have a whole list of, I don't know, over 100 action items that range from things like feasibility studies and further engineering studies that need to be done on the East Bank Boulevard, more detailed analysis on the Riparian Framework that's presented in the plan. We have design engineers that we used during the planning process that gave a general idea of how the river might be laid back to create this park, but that needs much more analysis and engineering so that we know exactly how much riverbank needs to be cut out, and then where that fill goes and how that is used to create a park space. More coordination in terms of implementation for affordable housing, transit. So lots of work with WEGO and MDHA and NDOT and all of those entities. And then also working on a guidelines for a development strategy so that when we are able to start bringing developers in, what guidelines do we want to set forth or parameters do we want to set with them, such as, guidelines for sustainable design and construction for sites and buildings, would we want to incorporate operations and maintenance type of guidelines in there, but also things such as the amount of green space or tree minimum requirements. There are all sorts of sustainability and resiliency measures that we could incorporate into these sort of parameters for developers. But we need to kind of get on the ground now that the vision is created to create those sort of implementation and design tools that will lay that framework to make sure that it is actually designed, constructed, and then ultimately operated and maintained in a resilient and sustainable way.
Great. So let's talk a little bit more about heat island effect. How can Nashville combat the heat island effect on the East Bank in particular? So what specific actions could be part of that East Bank development to make that happen?
Yeah, I think getting rid of all this asphalt that's here, maybe putting some parking underground and getting some white roofs, and then as much green space as we can put in the East Bank, as many trees, as many open fields, meadows, any living plant is going to help us reduce the urban heat island effect, and then of course painting the roofs white.
When in doubt, plant a tree.
Excellent. Okay, so one more about laying back the bank. So Harriet, you just actually alluded to that, the concept of layback. So tell us a little bit more about how they function and what that means for development that surrounds them.
So in the East Bank plan, we present what's called a Riparian Framework for flood management. And so that is just kind of a fancy way of saying, of working with the physical riverbank itself in order to create intentional places where the river could flood, that could be parks or greenway spaces that are intentionally built to be flooded at times. And then using the cut or the soil that is kind of used to create that space to then build up other parts of the East Bank where development could happen. So this is something that is done all over the world. It's not a new concept or something that's totally new, but it would be something that's kind of new for Nashville in terms of creating a park space where the river's allowed to really kind of flood and breathe during times that it's really rainy, and then in our hot dry summers it'll just be a really great park space.
Great, thank you, Harriet. So what are some examples of other cities that have redeveloped predominantly industrial sites with a sustainability focus, and what have been those outcomes?
So there are several cities that are going through the same process over the past 20 years. One of note that's sort of newer to the game is Omaha, Nebraska. And they've just gone through a revitalization program for their park spaces, which are doing a lot of what Harriet mentioned about creating spaces that are floodable versus open park space in a hot time of year. They've really looked at this as a long-range plan and utilized the Envision rating system, where they achieved a platinum score also, which is a rating system for infrastructure projects. When they looked at doing this planning process, they actually also did some capital improvements of other buildings, like a new science museum, some other hotels and things that were going to really also facilitate the activity that's needed, right? You have to have things that people want to also visit and bring other people to for conventions and for other events. So really looking at it holistically from how do we get people there, what are the people using, and how do we make those places better?
Great. Okay, so this is actually a really, really good question. So they're like, oh no. By creating so much density on the banks of the Cumberland River, one might assume the East Bank vision would create a number of challenges from an environmental stewardship perspective. How does a plan like this address things like water pollution, waste management, and access to green space while still maximizing use of space?
Well, Mikhail captured it pretty nicely earlier when she said that if you're a raindrop and you fall out of the sky on the property now versus if you're a raindrop and you fall out of the sky when this is complete, you're going to be a much more healthy raindrop by the time you get to the river. And I think the entire development area will be able to say that. So from a stormwater quality perspective, the 2B version of what's going to be built will be immensely improved over what we have now. From a quantity perspective, I guess the important thing to realize is at Metro Water Services, we don't make guesses on anything. We take models that we know are calibrated correctly. We model the behavior of the river based on the amount of rain that falls out of the sky, and we're able to accurately predict what the river is going to do. So as we go through the planning process with Harriet, if they propose this sort of development, we can actually put that into the model with a core, and we can demonstrate what's going to happen. So I think anything that we're going to do with this entire development along the East Bank will be relatively predictable, and we can make decisions that will result in an improvement in any aspect of any form of sustainability, reliability, or redundancy.
And I would add, if some of the people who are living here aren't living in newly developed cornfields, then we're all better off. So what we want is that density. We want to redevelop already developed spaces and leave undeveloped spaces alone.
And I'll just add to that, a really important part of the plan is the concept of complete communities. which is really a sustainability and resiliency concept at its core. So that's creating neighborhoods that also have access to transportation, access to parks and green space, things that enable them to walk instead of drive. So we're reducing our emissions, we're reducing our energy usage, and it enables, real integration of green spaces and tree canopy and the like into the urban neighborhood itself. We have a real opportunity, again, being able to build this from the ground up, and that we can get the soil volume in to make sure that those, trees are able to grow in a way where they're really kind of performing in terms of carbon sequestration and absorbing stormwater and that sort of thing. So the real opportunities to build neighborhoods that, although they will be dense and urban, will be much the kind of footprint per person in terms of carbon and water and energy usage and that kind of thing will be much smaller because there are a lot of opportunities, as Mikhail mentioned, for redundancy and things like that.
Great. So we've gotten a couple of questions about waste, and obviously Nashville, waste is a topic that has come up a lot really recently in Nashville. And so when we think about new development, how does construction and demolition waste play into our overall thought process, and what specific strategies should Nashville and the city be considering as we think about this redevelopment?
I can help with this one. In new construction projects, even when we have the ability to demolish something and do new again, I think, again, going back to that systems thinking, if we are scraping up asphalt parking lots, where is that asphalt then going, and can we use it somewhere else as a backfill material, another material? So creating those synergies, also, again, moving beyond just parcel to parcel, project to project, where are we looking at sort of these opportunities to sort of stockpile some materials and have the ability to then reuse them in ways that we're also saving on not trucking things from other counties or trucking things to counties. So again, that vision of how do we help our neighbors, right? Or how do we create these different balances and utilize what we have so that when we go to construct and bring in new materials, also encourage the development community to look and see what we have in our local and not be necessarily bringing in materials from faraway lands and places.
Great. Okay, so another very specific strategy that I think we're witnessing and observing across our community and in terms of increased adoption is use of electric vehicles. And so any of the panelists, how might EVs play into redevelopment along the East Bank? We've talked a lot about transportation and the benefits that East Bank can provide there, but what about that specific strategy?
So I think EVs in general, I mean, we all know how great, like, the last Super Bowl series of commercials were when we saw all the amazing new models coming out and got very excited about all the EVs that are coming to market. I think from, again, a district standpoint and having people depend less on cars but then have the ability to charge a car when they need to is increasingly important. But it's also increasingly important to where we're getting that electricity that is servicing those cars. So if we're thinking about it, again, as a large scale, how we're providing a utility, how we're thinking about where that utility is coming from, we want to encourage development community to install and use more EVs so that we have that opportunity for folks who want to live on this side of the river and have EVs to be able to charge. Something, again, on the electric side that we think about a lot in general is also just thinking about sort of the nexus between all these different pieces and parts of infrastructure. So stretching beyond even EVs, but thinking about our street lighting. How are we, the pumps that we'll be utilizing to move water to potable sources, to these new buildings, and how efficient are those even becoming, so that we can then think holistically about the district and how much our sort of nexus of all of these things are creating a more efficient environment.
So I'm going to ask our last question. So from each of your perspectives, either looking back over the 20 plus months of planning or the vision document, is there anything that's missing?
I'll go first. What we have is opportunity for foresighted behavior. And as long as we maintain the momentum and the enthusiasm towards designing and building anticipatory, I think this will be a good project. It's going to be so incredibly complicated, it's going to take a lot of people's focus to avoid losing that momentum and the foresight. So if anything's missing, it's I guess it's my worry that we'll lose the opportunity we have to be as aggressive as we're being.
I'm concerned that open space and trees and natural banks don't generate tax revenue. They don't have a lot of lobbyists. Those lobbyists they have are kind of polite and quiet. So I'm very concerned that those aspects of the plan will fall out when we get more vocal advocates for tax-generating businesses and such.
I think the one thing that I've recognized reading through the plan is we spend a lot of the plan time talking about stormwater management, river management, assuming new water falling, and is there opportunity for more reuse? So dictating how we capture and potentially districtize water so that we can use non-potable sources for things like irrigation or toilet flushing and do that at a larger scale, which downstream, pun intended, because that's how I roll, downstream you will not, again, you're helping mitigate any kind of flood or any kind of excess water going to places where you don't by capturing and reusing. And it's hard to do on a parcel by parcel basis, especially if you're a more urban parcel. And we're trying to come up with some great solutions, but if we could do those district-wide and have that water available to us and shared between potentially parcels, I think there'd be a lot more opportunity for people to just plug and play and use that for their non-potable needs.
Well, I love hearing these things because I have been so kind of neck deep in this plan that it's almost hard to see any holes or missing pieces. But a couple of things that I have been thinking about is working on this plan really made me think about how we need a more or could use a more kind of holistic strategy for the riverbank throughout Davidson County. In all of our planning work, there are a lot of exciting projects going on in planning work with Wharf Park and Oracle and Newhoff and the downtown riverfront and then now the East Bank. And so, I think we need to be thinking from a systems perspective, from a really large scale perspective about how we are orienting as a metro entity to the Cumberland River itself, both in terms of making it publicly accessible for people for as much as possible for recreation, greenway usage, that sort of thing, but also from a resiliency perspective. How are we treating it? How are we looking at it? And are we being as forward thinking as we need to be? The other thing that I wish, I kind of could have gotten into a plan, but I almost didn't think of it in time, was really a commitment to climate positive design for the landscapes on the East Bank. So with landscape design, especially when you're looking at something where we're thinking about parks and greenway spaces of this magnitude, you can, there's a really exciting initiative called the Climate Positive Design Challenge, which is all about kind of taking sustainability to the next step and thinking about how landscape spaces, tree canopy and that kind of thing can actually work to sequester carbon, store it and actually be making a positive contribution to climate change and not resting on just sustainability, but even taking a next step further. So those are things that I'm kind of thinking about and excited about as we move forward. That are related to the East Bank plan, but not stopping there.
Excellent. All incredible feedback, and huge thank you to our panelists. I got some really great ideas today and learned from you all, and then I think also I'm excited to hear that there's some momentum about ideas and things that we're considering in the mayor's office. So please join me in thanking our panelists, and thanks to each of you for coming here today. There were a few questions that we didn't get to, so if your question was not answered, please come find me afterwards, and I'm happy to talk about it or find another time to connect with some of our experts. So thank you again.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.